Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's C-O-M-B-E-S-T, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?
I'm Egbert, the owner of this station. Check out my website at egbert.com. That's E-G-G-B-U-R-T, egbert.com. Now it's back to Brad and John. Check out their website at bjshow.co. The BJ Show? Come on, guys. Anyway, here's B and J.
John, this is pretty funny. John just sent me a picture of his... Is this your diary?
No, this is from a school program I was in that actually, Brad, took place at your alma mater, Hazelwood Central. One day a week in elementary school, I would go to Hazelwood Central. They had like a program thing there, whatever. Really? And anyway, we had journals there, and so every week we wrote in our journal.
You went to the high school one day a week?
They had a like kind of a special program thing for some kids that I got to go to.
So the date on this is September 10th, 1985? Is that what I'm saying?
The 30th, yeah.
September 30th, 1985.
So, yeah, almost 40 years ago.
John gives a dissertation on the St. Louis Cardinals, lost to the Montreal Expos 75. Ozzie Smith and Tommy Herr hit home runs for the Cardinals. Tim Wallach and Mitch Webster hit home runs for the Expos. I have 549 baseball cards. Big Red won the football game 43-28. And then the teacher writes, and this is funny, this is a picture of this is like lined paper. John, what a neat card collection. You are really into sports. Now, there is something serious I need to tell you. And in big letters it says, stop playing in class. It has that in cursive, and then it's in all caps. Stop playing in class, and it's like a cloud drawn around it. Did the teacher do that?
Yeah, she did that. Yeah. And the next week's what's not shown there, I was very petulant about it. And the next week I said, we did not do anything good today. And that was my entire thing, because I really showed her. I wanted to show her my disapproval for her disapproval of me. Yeah, but that just goes to show, like, you know, I wasn't going to sit in class like a bump on a log. You know what I'm saying? I was a 7-year-old boy at the time. Cut me a little slack, you know?
Okay. I'm going to address this, and I don't want to make this sound like I'm being nasty or mean. And it's always sad when you lose someone in your industry who, you know, is actually sort of a big deal in your industry. This particular person and I have had an ongoing fight for, 26, 27 years. This was said to me by friend Cosmo, who is the morning guy, him and his new wife, Kat, Cosmo and Kat. They are on Y107 in Columbia. And Cosmo is an incredible talent. I mean, he is one of these guys that he's working in Columbia, but he should be working in St. Louis or New York City or Chicago. He's really good. And this is a Facebook post. He sent this to me last night, and I didn't know anything about it. Steve died suddenly Wednesday evening after going to the emergency room at a local hospital. He was 71. In addition to being the owner and CEO of Kaspar Broadcasting, this is Steve Kaspar, Steve was also an accomplished musician and songwriter, passionate pet lover, believer in community, and proud patriot. Steve was married to his wife, Pat, for 45 years. In addition to his wife, he's survived by 3 sons, Ryan, Alex, and Trevor, a daughter-in-law, Lafayette, and 2 granddaughters, Lillian and Olivia. He also leaves behind his radio station family, some of whom had known him for over 40 years. Funeral arrangements and a special radio memorial service are pending. Okay. I knew Steve's father, Vern Kaspar, and how I knew Steve's father was an interesting character, shall we put it that way, who had been in the radio business since like 1935. And how I met Steve's father, Vern lived in Frankfort, Indiana, where he owned a couple of radio stations. And for years he owned KWRE out in Warrenton. And he got back in the early 90s what was called the Docket 80-90 expansion rule, and he got a new frequency, 99.9, put it on the air as KFAV. The first couple years it went on as a top 40 station, then they switched to country. They've been country ever since. And at the time, Vern was building the station. Station was not on the air yet, and he wanted me to do traffic reports for him. This is when I was doing my traffic network. And Vern would repeatedly call me almost every week and take me out to lunch. because I think Vern was kind of bored. You know, he lived in Lafayette. He was staying here in the area while he was building the FM station. And he would sit there at lunch and essentially tell me how great he was. And I don't mean to be a jerk, but that's what he did. He had this ego.
Yeah, we all know people like that they can have an hour-long lunch conversation and tell you how everybody loves them and all the great things they do.
Right. And at the time, I will tell a story. At the time, one of the lunches we had was the day after Robert Hyland died. And if you know the crazy story with Robert Hyland, he's the guy that ran KMOX, and at one point in time, KMOX was like the number one rated station in the country, you know, and to the point where KMOX had been the number one station in St. Louis for, I don't know, 20, 30 years, some crazy thing like that. Billed huge amounts of money. Jack Carney was to the point where there was a waiting list to get on the air as an advertiser for the Jack Carney show. You had to agree to spend at least $10,000 a month on Jack Carney's show, which back in the day, even today, $10,000 a month is a really nice client to have. This was like, today, this would have been like $30,000 or $40,000 a month, okay? So we're at lunch, and Vern says to me, you know that Robert Hyland died yesterday? And I said, yes. And he says, you know, there's only one person in the entire country who has the business acumen and who has the knowledge of broadcasting and who could fill his shoes. And I throw out a name of a guy that I thought was going to be the heir apparent to Robert Hyland. And Vern got mad because the person he was talking about was him. He was he was the guy that was going to, and I laughed, and he got mad at me because he was dead serious. Okay, so I knew Vern, and I probably had, I don't know, maybe 9 or 10 lunches with him, and he was always talking about, and he did this thing where he traveled all over the world, and what he did was, this was sort of quite honestly, to me, this was like a scam. He would travel all over the world, and then he would run these editorials on his stations here in the St. Louis area, and he'd run his editorials on the stations in Frankfurt. And essentially what he was doing was he was essentially writing off his travel as background for
his business expense.
As a business expense for his editorials. Okay, so and he would get on there. Last week I was in Moscow, Russia, and he would go on a dissertation. And some of these were like 30, some of these were like, 3 and 4 and 5 minutes long. And once again, we're on a country station. Okay, not making fun of the country listeners, but there aren't too many country listeners who are going to listen on a country station to a 5-minute dissertation on geopolitical, disharmony
on perestroika and glasnost.
Right, yeah. Exactly. They want to know what Toby Keith did yesterday. That's what they want to know about. Okay, so I buy the station by KSLQ, and the ink wasn't even dry on the deal, and Steve Kaspar calls me up. I've never met Steve before. I knew his father, never met Steve. Steve's like for 2 or 3 days bugging me. Brad, we need to have lunch. We need to have lunch today. Okay, fine. So finally I go, look, can I just meet you at your office? So I met him in his office. They had an office off of Highway M, Main Street in O'Fallon at the time. And Steve, sits down and tells me, I bought, he says, I know you bought KSLQ in Washington. Now, there's a little crazy backstory. That once upon a time, Steve and his father had this huge falling out. And Steve worked for his father at one of his radio stations. And Steve and his father had this huge falling out. And Steve left employment at his father's radio station and went to work at, ironically, KSLQ. He worked for Not For Me, worked for the previous owner, Ken Kenzie. And Ken fired him. I won't tell you the reason he got fired, but it's sort of an interesting reason. And then he went to work at KLPW. Well, and then when his dad gets 99.9 on the air, they get together and they make good with each other. And Steve never was the general manager of the station because that was always Vern. Steve was the sales manager. So Steve has this meeting with me and essentially says to me in so many words, I know why you bought the station because you're going to market into St. Charles County. He says, I don't want you to do that. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make you a deal. You agree with me to not market into St. Charles County, and as a return favor, I will come down to your station 1 day a week, and I will teach your salespeople to be the best salespeople they could ever be, because I am the best salesperson. So in other words,
Oh, wow.
you could tell that
What a generous offer.
he could tell that from his father. And I said to Steve, Steve, isn't that collusion? And he goes, what are you talking about? I go, well, essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to cut a deal with me where we're going to carve up the territory, and in return for me not competing on your turf in St. Charles and Warren and Lincoln County, because keep in mind the previous owner of this station, Ken, ran it as a small town Washington station, rarely ever crossed the river into St. Charles County or Warren County. So Steve gets a little bit upset with me. I go, Steve, not interested. From that day on, it was game on. Steve did.
And how many years? What year was that, Brad?
Oh, I can tell you when it was. This was 1998. I can tell you exactly what year it was.
Okay.
I can tell you almost the day would have been about April 17th of 1998, because our deal would finally clear the FCC, I think April 10th of 1998. Because you even though you buy the station, it's the same problem that what's going on with Odyssey right now. Even though they've gone through the bankruptcy court and they're ready to come out of the bankruptcy court, the FCC has not approved the deal yet because of the deal with George Soros, which is a whole other story.
Okay.
So,
all right. I got it. I just want to know how long.
The ink's dry on the deal. From that point on, it's game on. He did everything in his power to make my life miserable. And probably my funniest story was, and I told this story one time, where one of his salespeople is calling on my friend Randy Bluestone. And did I tell you the story, this crazy story? Randy Bluestone owned the Country Club car wash.
The Country Club car wash and all that stuff, yeah.
Okay, Randy Bluestone owned the Country Club car wash. And his location on Highway N had an office he wasn't using, so he let me use the office for a while. So one morning, I pull into the parking lot, and my office is on the opposite end of his office, and he sees me pull into the parking lot, and he calls me on my cell phone. And he says, hey, he doesn't say my name. And he says, hey, I just saw you pull in. When you get settled and come down to my office, I have somebody I want you to meet. So I said, okay, fine. So I go down to Randy's office, and I walk in the office, and Randy's at his desk, and sitting across the desk from him is this woman who I have no idea who it is. I've never seen the woman in my life. And he puts his hand up as I walk through the door to not say anything, just be quiet. And Randy says to this woman, hey, now what were you telling me about Brad Hildebrand again? So she goes on a 5-minute dissertation about how I'm the worst person in the world, how I'm a terrible business person, how I am a crook, I'm a criminal, I'm a this, I'm a that, I'm a rapist, I'm a baby abuser, you name it, I'm it. And I have no idea who this woman is. And I'm standing there in the doorway, and this person is just eviscerating me. And Randy is sitting there like this turned into one of the funniest things he's ever seen. So for 5 minutes, this lady is eviscerating me, and Randy stops her, and he says, are you done? And she goes, well, I got more. And Randy says, do you know who that is right there? And she looks at me, and she goes, I have no idea. And he says, that's Brad Hildebrand. This was a sales rep from KFAV. This is how they sold against me. And she was in there trying to sell him on the Country Club. Sell the Country Club car wash and advertising on KFAV. This is one of the many stories that I have with Steve Kaspar and his tactics of how he would tell his salespeople. I mean, they tried to kick us out of the O'Fallon Chamber of Commerce. They tried to kick us out of the Greater St. Charles Chamber of Commerce by writing nasty letters to the board of directors telling about how bad we were and things like that. That's the way this guy operated. And once again, am I sad he's dead? Yeah. I hate to see a competitor go by the wayside. But by the same token, it's like I talked about this all the time. What bothers me about my industry, instead of us carping at each other, instead of us, well, that station sucks, my station's better, because my competition is not KFAV, it's not KMOX, it's not 97.1. My competition, this radio station's competition, and every radio station in this area, its competition is Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, that's our competition. And the problem is it just doesn't stop. That there's still this and it's going on right now with this crazy thing going on, if you know what's going on with this. And by the way, I did call I texted J.C. Corcoran yesterday to ask him to call on the show because I told you about there's all this crazy crap going on with him, and there's all these Facebook pages going back and forth and stuff like that. And he declined, which I think is interesting because, and essentially here, I'll read you the quick little back and forth between me and JC because, John, you know me fairly well, okay? What do? I don't make fun of people. I ask them to be on the show, right?
100%. That's very true, Brad. That's
so I said, this is yesterday morning, 8:50. Get off the air. I chop up the show, 8:50. It's yesterday morning. Hey, JC, I talked about you today. A listener texted me and said I should reach out to you to be guest on my morning show. Any interest? He responds back at 10 o'clock. Thanks, but not at the moment. Some other things going on. And I send just like a little ha-ha, funny. My feelings are hurt. He says, nah, just something unrelated to you. Got to let something play out. And I said, no guts, no glory. Here's the guy that's going to be on Facebook today, all day long, complaining about things, and I'd give him, 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes on the air here. He doesn't want to do it, I mean, once again, this is my complaint. You got a complaint. You got a beef. I got a radio station. We'll talk about it on the air, right?
But now, Brad, hold on. You know that the thing there is, if JC or anybody else is posting to Facebook, he's in complete control of the story, of the narrative. He tells his version of it. If he got on the radio with you, you would ask him questions that he might not want to answer.
So what you're telling me is he's taking a page out of the Kamala Harris playbook?
I'm just saying, in that regard, why would you risk having to answer a challenging question when you could just post on Facebook?
I get what you're saying. Back to Steve Kaspar. His family, I'm very sorry that Steve has left us. Steve was a very talented guy. He really was. He had a great voice, was a true radio guy, a very talented musician as well, too. I'll give him that. Had an attractive wife. Matter of fact, his wife, he was originally from Indiana. I think his wife at one point in time was like Miss Indiana in the Miss America contest or something like that. 3 very handsome-looking boys who I don't think they worked for the station. I think 2 or 3 of them. I think 2 or 3, or maybe all 3 of them moved out of the area. I'm very sad to see him go. But you know what, Steve? I didn't appreciate what you did to me, and I do forgive you. How's that?
That's pretty good, Brad. And you're going to buy his stations, right?
It's interesting. I don't know what's going to happen with that. I really don't know because I know his wife was not happy with him being in the radio business anymore, and I know it gotten back to a couple of us that his wife was on him because she wanted to retire down the Lake of the Ozarks, and she wanted him to sell the stations and cash out, and mainly.
Hold on, let me interrupt. As an homage to his dad, Vern, couldn't you do like a travelogue to Tunerville and then write it off?
Yeah, it would be like $1.50 in gas. I'd write off. John, we went a little long. I'm sorry.
We had a great week this week, Brad. And happy Friday, and I'll see you on Monday.
And John, I'll tell you this. I'm glad we're back because a week ago today, I didn't think this was going to be today.
Oh,
but
me too, Brad.
Don't
get me soft on you on a Friday.
Yeah, you're not going to make fun of me, right?
That's right.
At least for the moment. Okay.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's Combest, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?